Welcome to the Marinade with Jason Earle. Thank you so much for coming along on this journey with us. We're on episode 5 with the great Oliver Wood of the Wood Brothers. When you think about starting your own podcast, there has to be these ideas in your head of what you want it to look like. And of course, when I knew I was going to interview people that I really respected about their creative process, I had a list of people in mind. I knew there were certain names that I definitely wanted to catch up with, and I've had the great fortune of catching up with several of those people already. Oliver Wood was very high on that list. I had the honor of interviewing him ahead of Suwannee Roots Revival in 2016, and we had a great conversation on the phone, and I thought in that moment, next time he's around, I'm going to make sure that I catch him for the podcast. So thankful that Oliver sat down with us. Really thoughtful guy. Incredibly busy on a day like that when you're the headliner at a festival like Suwannee Roots Revival, but he still sat down and was very thoughtful and took his time with his answers, and we got deep on a bunch of different topics. One of the things that we talk about is Colonel Bruce Hampton, and Colonel Bruce is someone whose music I've really respected and loved for a long time. He was kind of a mentor for Oliver, and I got to interview Bruce at Suwannee Roots last year, where we talked about a lot of different things, including the fact that Oliver said that if he could just jam with anybody on the lineup, anybody at Suwannee Roots Revival, that he'd want to do a duet with the late, great Colonel Bruce Hampton. And so I've included a snippet of that conversation with Bruce at the beginning of this conversation, because I think it informs where Oliver and I sort of intersect and how we ended up meeting and having these conversations. It's really cool to think about the role of mentors in your life, especially when you talk about creativity. You talk about creative endeavors. It's really important to have somebody you can look to and ask questions of, and somebody who's been there, and somebody who's made the mistakes that you're making, and somebody who's pushed forward and gotten better as a result of that growth. So it's really cool that I got a chance to talk to Oliver at the same spot where I got to talk to Colonel Bruce. And Oliver and I caught up in his dressing room backstage at the amphitheater stage at Suwannee Roots Revival. Chris Wood walks through at some point with his bass. Just a really cool scene. And then they went out and played a raucous, joyous, fantastic set. So grateful that he took the time to talk with us. Thank you guys so much for tuning into the Marinade. Listen to episode 4 if you haven't already, and catch up on the other episodes if need be. We're really grateful for all of your love and support. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Marinade Podcast. We're on Instagram at Marinade_podcast, on Twitter at Marinade Podcast. You can find some of my writings on Instagram as well. I write short stories and prose, and if you're into that kind of thing, check it out. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Oliver Wood of the Wood Brothers, after you hear a little snippet of Colonel Bruce Hampton talking about Oliver.
I talked to Oliver Wood. I didn't get to podcast it, but I talked to Oliver Wood last week.
Last week, yeah.
Yeah.
His brother's out of surgery, I know, 2 days.
Oh, good.
Yeah. I think he's going to be fine.
Good. Well, he had such nice things to say about you.
That's very kind, man. I've had nicer things to say about him than he would about me.
Because I asked him who he'd want to play with, like if he could have a dream jam session here. And he goes, honestly, I'd just like to do it with Colonel Bruce, just the duet.
That's quite an honor.
Right?
I've been following Oliver since I guess he was 22.
Yeah.
And always loved his playing. Personally, just a wonderful guy.
And I asked him, like, okay, do you know Colonel Bruce that well? He said you were like a mentor to him. That's the way he described it. And
he was a mentor to me also.
That's awesome.
So thank you so much again for sitting down with us. We talked last year about right before Suwannee Roots, and then unfortunately you had to cancel because how's your brother doing, by the way?
He's doing great. In fact,
Good.
I wouldn't be surprised if he walks in and we're looking for his phone in a minute.
Okay, good. All right. 2017.
Yeah.
The conversation that we had, we talked about creativity a little bit in your creative process, and you mentioned that food really inspires you. And you talked about, like, I forget what the meal was, but you ended up talking about this meal and you were so passionate about it.
I don't remember the specifics, but yeah, that can be. That's an art, Food is art.
So is there anything specifically recently that's really got you fired up that you've eaten or you've made, maybe?
Sadly, today I've only been to Waffle House and Moe's.
Oh, man.
No. So the answer is
How
no.
stirring.
Yeah. So in that regard, I have not. I've definitely not.
It's
You're
all
fine. I've not been inspired today culinarily. If we have an awesome dinner, we're gonna have an awesome gig. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So.
But I guess it doesn't have to be. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it doesn't have to necessarily be at a fancy place or something special.
No,
I mean, Waffle House could
like
be that moment.
amazing fried chicken, or something a little more down home. But if it just has some kind of a certain specialness to it and vibe, and somebody cooked it for you with love, and that can make all the difference.
Was there like growing up? Was there something in food, or was there like a grandma or grandpa or mom or dad or somebody who was like really cooking that meal that fired you up?
I wouldn't say our mom was an amazing cook, but there were certain dishes, especially like my mom and her mom, like our grandmother. There were certain things that they always made that we really loved, that we requested, and so I mean, there's things like that, but I don't know that anybody in our direct family was an amazing cook. Like my brother's probably a better cook than most of us.
Well, but that's the thing you said, Oliver, though, that that, and you just mentioned it again, that on the road, and I would imagine on the road also that you need those moments too for a little bit of sanity. Do you, when you're on the road, do you find yourself writing then, or do you have to have a place, or what does that process looks like?
Writing?
Yeah.
It can really vary. Sometimes we'll get into real writing mode, and I actually, for whatever reason, I had most of the day in the hotel today and got inspired and did some writing. And a lot of times, like we just finished recording a record, and
Awesome.
so we did lots of writing and sort of had this writing spurt. And then a lot of times what happens is when you finish that, you feel like kind of drained, and you kind of step away from the creative thing for a while, although we're making efforts now just to sort of continue the momentum that we've had and just keep writing and keep recording, and just sort of make that a ritual rather than just a seasonal thing,
Yeah. I love the last record.
Thank you.
It's really wonderful.
Thank you.
I'm excited about the new one. Is it different direction-wise? It sounds similar?
I think it's quite different. We really took our time with it, and we, rather than sort of do the normal thing where you write a bunch of songs and then take 2 weeks and just record them all in one sitting, we really, over the last 9 months, just on and off, went in and out of the studio and wrote stuff while we were on tour together, and sort of just recorded 1 or 2 songs at a time, and really put a little extra love into each one of them rather than rushing through the process. We kind of got to spread it out, and that was kind of different for us. We've never done it like that before. So musically, what that allowed for too is like we to record it in different places and with different engineers. We produced it ourselves, and it ended up being sort of more of a hodgepodge. So it's a little bit more all over the place, which is kind of how we liked it. It was almost like each song has its own little world, and that was kind of by the nature of how we did it, that's how it kind of came out. We like that concept, especially nowadays where people aren't necessarily even consuming whole albums, right? A lot of times people just listen to songs, and it's as far as they get is one song or a couple songs in, or they might hear a song on a playlist or something, and then so anyway.
Yeah, I don't understand that really. I mean, I guess I do, but I'm having a hard time with it just because I consume albums.
Right.
And I don't know if that's because I'm old-fashioned or because I just like the whole piece or what.
Yeah.
But there's this really great podcast called I Only Listen to the Mountain Goats.
I don't know that.
Welcome to Night Vale. Are you familiar with that? And it's this great fictional podcast, and the
the creator of that has this podcast called I Only Listen to the Mountain Goats. And so John Darnielle, the sort of mastermind behind the Mountain Goats, and this guy sit down and talk about just the Mountain Goats records.
Oh, God.
And he was talking about how sequence really matters to him. But you were just saying each song just sort of has its own world, exists in its own world.
Yeah.
So
does not mean that sequence doesn't matter. We did agonize over the sequence, and we always do, because there's certain things that flow better always. But maybe this record, less than some of our other records, doesn't feel like it needs to be cohesive. Like that was what was cool. Like when we mix a record, the standard thing to do is send your whole album to one person and they mix the whole thing, and there's a certain homogeneous thing that's generally desirable that you're going for. But in our case, we had 4 different people mix the album. Different songs were mixed by different people. So right there, and then the songs were recorded by a couple different people. So right there, you just have a variety sort of built into it that, when somebody mixes a song, it's kind of fun to let them do their thing. And even though we might have some influence on it, they're artists too, and they're creating something. And so, I don't know, it's kind of neat to have a variety for a change instead of having one sort of homogeneous sonic landscape. I feel like it jumps around a little bit.
are you okay with that? Letting go?
Very.
Really? Yeah.
Letting go of the control. That's it's not easy, but I think we're getting good at it, and we're getting good at balancing, the idea of knowing what we want and controlling things to a certain degree, but then also letting go and see just, especially when you find somebody that you trust, that you work with. It's like working with a producer or co-writing a song with somebody and just knowing that they do something great and trusting that it's going to be good,
Yeah. Well, I guess you just have to be intentional about surrounding yourself with people that you trust. And it's all about trust in that instance.
Yeah.
I mean, speaking of trust, so I want to take it to the Colonel Bruce thing.
Yeah.
Condolences. I know he was a big influence in your life. I had the honor of talking to him last year, like I said, and I asked you last year before this festival, I asked you who you'd want to play with if you could have you had your druthers and you could have like a dream jam session. And you said, I just want to play with Colonel Bruce. And there were all these amazing artists. Can you speak a little bit about just his influence on your life?
Well, I've known, I got to know him a long time ago. First off, when I lived in Atlanta, in the early 90s, I was touring with a guy named Tinsley Ellis, which we may have talked about last time. I can't remember.
Yeah, I think we did.
And Tinsley was friends with Bruce, and that was during the Aquarium Rescue Unit days. And so we did a lot of touring with the Aquarium Rescue Unit. And so I got to know all of those guys. That's where I met, Jimmy Herring and O'Teal and Jeff Sipe, and it was that era of the Aquarium Rescue Unit. And so, that's where I got to spend time with Bruce at first when I was quite young. And years later, he ended up marrying my wife and me. He was our pastor.
It's amazing.
And then, on that last day, that concert that we had, he there's a long story behind it, but he brought me a Snooks Eaglin record. Snooks Eaglin is my favorite guitar player. He was a blind guitar player out of New Orleans, so a little bit obscure to the non-music geek, But Bruce remembered that, from 30 years back, that was my favorite guitar player. And that night, on his birthday, he brought me a CD of that, and I'm sure he, blew a few other people's minds with gifts and stories. And so anyway, I have super fond memories of just him, and his influence is great just because of his attitude and his, I love how serious he was about music. Like, he was really serious about music, yet he was not serious. He was not too serious about himself. And I think that's one thing I try to remember all the time, be serious about the music and But don't get too serious about yourself.
Oliver, he said that to me.
Oh, I'm sure. Did
You
he
know,
really?
yeah, 'cause
I've
'cause
heard him say it. I've heard
Right.
him say it. I mean that stuck with me. And he doesn't even have to say it. He lived it. you know?
Yeah, because he
lived it.
said something to the effect of like, I told him how I've been accused of, probably rightfully so, that I take things too seriously sometimes.
Right.
And so I mentioned that to him, and he said in that like booming,
Mm-hmm.
that presence that he had.
Yeah.
And he said, you know what you should take seriously and what you shouldn't. He
Yeah.
said, I don't know, but you know.
Yeah.
And take those things seriously. And then
Yeah.
he said, the key to life is being, don't act like a child, but have a childlike wonder.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that seems to be how he lived.
I think he did. To the end.
Did you guys write together?
Did we write
Write
together?
music?
I wouldn't say that.
No.
No. I mean, I got to play with him a few times. I really wasn't like, I went a year at a time without seeing Bruce a lot of times. So,
Yeah.
but there was always a connection. He was good at staying connected.
That's amazing. And that memory, too.
Mhm.
Like you said, he remembered 30 years earlier.
Yeah, just a ridiculous memory.
It's crazy.
Yeah, and such an intuition.
I stumped him. I told him about, he was on an episode of Space Ghost Coast to Coast.
Okay.
And I stumped him because he was like, oh, yeah, I was on that episode. It's just crazy to think that someone would create that much.
Right.
And it's so much so that they just forgot.
Right.
Forgot stuff.
Right.
What are you consuming now? Music, books? What are you consuming?
Oh man, I'm reading Sam Cooke biography, Greg Allman biography.
There's a theme there.
Iron John, which is a cool book that my brother just gave me. What else? Nina Simone.
Listening to Nina Simone.
Listening to
Yeah.
Nina Simone. Trying to think anything new. I mean, I'm always listening to the old stuff. A lot of Snooks Eaglin, J.B. Lenore, stuff that I love.
You told me before that last year you said that, like, really if you're listening, you're usually listening to old blues stuff. That's what I'm assuming. Is that still true?
Yeah, I mean, in general, I've certainly listened to plenty of that stuff, but I also like old country. I love Hank Williams, and and I love old Appalachian music. I love gospel music of pretty much every era. And getting into the Sam Cooke book, I started checking out a lot more gospel stuff, and I love Mahalia Jackson, and I love Aretha Franklin's gospel, and Soul Stirrer, Sam Cooke before he was doing secular music, and so I love all that stuff.
That gospel stuff. What is? I know there's an infectious thing about that, and I grew up, going to church, so there's some of that nostalgia almost to it.
Yeah.
What is that for you?
I did not grow up going to church, but I just got really in the same way that I was drawn to blues music always, just the rawness and the emotional immediacy of it. Same thing for gospel music, and they're so connected. I mean, there's not a lot of difference really in the spirit of it, even though they happen in different venues, and there's supposedly a different a different inspiration, but to me it's very much the same thing, and it makes you feel good, and it makes everybody who's listening and who's participating feel good, and that's what it's supposed to do.
Yeah, emotional immediacy is a really good phrase. It's a really good term. Yeah. Does that translate into what you do writing wise?
I hope so. I mean, I certainly try.
Yeah.
Yep.
I mean, I feel it, but I just wonder whether you're conscious of it.
Oh, I don't know. I think the best things that happen are subconscious things, and so it seems like any time I really try to do something, it's not as good as if it just happens.
Yeah.
If I just do it, I think it's kind of one of those things where actually Colonel Bruce one time remember he said, "Never focus." He said, "Never focus," which sounds
What?
counterintuitive, but I think I know what he means. It means, you know, that's what it means to me. Is the best stuff is when you're not trying, you're just doing. You know, you're just being and doing. You're just the best stuff comes out when you're not thinking about it. In other words, thinking is the last thing you want to do.
That's interesting, because I feel like a lot of folks that I talk to, you know, I have these conversations a lot, and a lot of artists that I talk to say that they sit down and do the work. Like, you wake up, and it's like, you know, I got to get up, I got to put pen to paper, and I got to create, you know, something that sucks before I can get to the strong thing.
Yeah.
And in that process, it's a strong thing. But in my mind, I guess, growing up, maybe there's this romanticized idea of creativity where I always thought sort of it's going to happen when it happens, which is, I don't know if that's exactly what you're saying.
Well, yeah, it's going to happen when it happens. That doesn't mean you shouldn't go and have to be disciplined and go work on stuff.
Yeah.
In fact, you should, you know, but I think it's when you're not paying attention that the magic happens. Like I could be having these brilliant idea and just writing it and trying to force it, and then something out of nowhere makes an idea come, and it's not like you can be inspired, but you can't be inspired on purpose. I can't. Like, you can just try, and you can basically, like I've heard it put, you can just show up and wait and you know, put your pen down and start writing, and when it comes, it's going to come. It's not something you can force. That's for me, that's the way it is, and it could be musically or lyrically or whatever.
I might challenge you on that a little bit, just in the sense that but at the same time, you're doing all these other things that lead to that. Does that make sense? So
yeah,
you're reading all these books.
Absolutely.
Right.
So you need all the input. Absolutely. You have to put input data in order to get something to happen. So that's absolutely true. And all your inspiration is going to come from those experiences or those things that you're taking in. And that's for sure. But that's not you're feeding the well somehow. But then I guess the point is that there's a certain part you do not have control of, and that's the part that you got to honor somehow. You know,
I'm dealing with that right now. Just that, and that's why I think that's why I asked you the question earlier about letting go to an engineer or a producer or whoever.
Yeah.
Is that I'm really thinking about that concept of you don't really have control.
Yeah. Well, I think everything to me is balance. So you have to work hard, you have to show up, you have to try, and you also have to trust that once in a while, when you get out of your own way, the good stuff's going to come out if you put in that practice. So I think it's all one package. It's all a balancing act. It's a balance of working and being inspired, you know, and some people, you know, are just amazing at getting out of their own way, and like some of these guys that are like Eminem or somebody who can just freestyle rapping, you know, that's amazing to me.
Incredible.
It's incredible, and it's you know, there's a certain just pure like state of mind, and I used to see Bruce get in that state of mind on a special night, you know, with his just stuff he would start spouting out, or whether it was on his guitar or just vocalizing, and you know, we couldn't do it every day, you know. No, I mean, few of us are in control of it. In other words, you get up on stage, sometimes it just comes out and you're just on, and other times you just, no matter how hard you try, nothing's happened. So we're all the same in that regard.
And I think that's true no matter what the discipline.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a wild concept that, like, we expect people to be on all the damn time. We expect everyone to be on all the time, and that's not realistic.
Yeah.
You know?
Exactly. Yeah, so you can't beat yourself up when you're not inspired, you know.
Do you beat yourself up?
Oh, heck yeah. But less and less.
Good.
Like, the older I get, the less I let things slide. But
was there a turning point for you?
No.
No.
Just very
Process.
gradual. Still learning, still growing. Long way to go.
I got a long way to go too. And
Yeah,
it's
we all do.
Recently, I've gotten better. but I just did it today. I beat myself up all morning over
Did ya?
something I had zero control over.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And I went, dude, you've been working on this.
Yeah.
You've been having this conversation.
You know what? My favorite thing I heard was like some kind of study or survey of a bunch of senior citizens, and they were all asked, what's your biggest regret at this late point in your life? There's like they all said it's because I hate that I worried so much. I wasted so much time worrying, and that really I always remember that, because it's like, of course, think of all the worrying that we've done about stuff and beating ourselves up that did nothing. It absolutely wasted time.
It did negative things.
It did, exactly. It goes
I'm
the wrong
convinced.
way.
I just had my appendix taken out.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I'm convinced that what was going on there is purely psychological. Like,
Got it.
I mean, it's physical, obviously, but
I get it.
I'm convinced
Sure.
that my anxiety and my worry led to that.
Yeah.
And it makes no sense. Why beat yourself up about these things you have no control over? I mean,
Yes.
obviously, control the things you can control.
Yeah.
Right?
It's balance.
It is balance.
It's balance.
What do you do to stay centered? What do you do to stay balanced?
Well, I don't know. I try to do a little bit of meditating, a little bit of yoga, a little bit of exercise, trying to stay connected with people. I feel like connection with other people is very important. Whether it's a one-on-one thing or, it's really my favorite thing about playing music now is just connecting to an audience and to the band I'm playing with, and it's less the rock and roll part of it than it used to be, and more now just the spiritual feeling of just everybody being connected and sort of rising up together. That's just a big high,
That clearly means a lot to you. You mentioned that last time we talked.
Yeah, that's
clearly something
huge.
you think about.
That's huge. So I just hearing from people that, this has really been healing to me, or got me through something, that makes it feel like real important work.
That's amazing. It is important work, and that's great that you feel that.
Yeah, because it can feel real indulgent sometimes, or it can feel the opposite and feel like, what the hell are we doing out here, away from our families and scraping by and eating crappy food and stuff. And but then it comes back around to that. Oh yeah, we're helping, we're making people happy, and it makes us feel good to do that.
You're changing people's lives too. I mean, and I hope you're aware of that. You know,
it feels good.
Good. That's great.
Yeah.
I mean, the folks that there are people that are going to be here. Your set's at 10, I think, right?
Mm-hmm.
There are people that are going to be here at 10 at Spirit of the Suwannee Music Park.
Yep.
Who bought that ticket just to see you guys.
Yep. Well, we're looking forward to playing for them.
Yeah, that's great, man. Last thing, if I can, you just got off tour with the Derek and Susan, didn't you? How was that?
It was awesome. It was a real highlight. Yeah, we had all, Derek and Sue and I were all at the Colonel Bruce thing, and that was a big, heavy thing. So to get together and spend several weeks together over the summer was really fun, and we told a lot of stories and celebrated that, and bonded, and I've known those guys for a long time. It was a real nice hang and reunion, and got to collaborate and just hang out and do the thing.
They played right after Greg Allman passed away, and it was like 2 days later.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine. I just have a lot of respect for getting up there and doing your thing when something heavy like that happens. I mean, you guys have been through a lot,
It's probably the most therapeutic thing you can, for some of us to do. That's just that way it is, I think.
Just got to keep your head down and do it.
Yeah, and it just feels good. That's what connected us to those people we lost anyway, is the music. So that's how you keep them around,
Right. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Oliver.
All right. Pleasure.
Cheers, man.
Oliver Wood, everybody. Thank you so much, Oliver, for sitting down with us. Thank you so much to everybody who's listening. Go check out the Wood Brothers at thewoodbrothers.com. You can find them on all your social media. If they're coming to your town, don't miss their set. They ended up playing that night just a couple of hours after we sat down, and the set was incredible. It was absolutely beautiful. And those guys put on a great show every single time you see them. Don't miss them the next time they're coming around. They have a new record, as he mentioned, coming out soon, so be on the lookout for that. Thank you all so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, please go to wherever you consume podcasts and give us a rating. If you like what you're hearing, spread the word. If you like what you're hearing, find us on social media and keep listening. Thank you so much. Episode 5, The Marinade with Jason Earle. Cheers, y'all.
Night before last, I got loaded on a bottle of gin. On a bottle of gin. Yeah, night before last, yeah, I got loaded on a bottle of gin. A bottle of gin. But I feel alright. I feel alright. Yeah, I feel alright. I feel alright. Good Saturday night music. Why don't y'all help us out? You ready? I call you, respond. Tonight I might get loaded on a bottle of whiskey. On a bottle of whiskey.